How's it going, y'all? So I wanted to make a video or even a couple of videos on AG Grid React. It's a React table component, gives you a lot of like similar functionality to stuff that you expect from Excel. So in this showcase that I have a couple examples of like what you can do with AG Grid. So in this one, for example, we have some sample data that's coming in from a third party like open source API. We're just grabbing it, rendering it in like this read-only view. So you have these like, these filters. For the columns, you have sorting, and you do have like your export to CSV. But yeah, so this is just a read-only example. This is the one that we're going to be building first. There's a couple more that I have. So this one is like how you would build a invoice creator. So this would be like for purposes of having like forms. So with this one, you can come in here. So I just double click that and you can type in like, I don't know, web development services, right? So this is like an editable form with some fields that aren't editable. So you can't edit this. You can edit the unit price, edit the quantity, all that kind of stuff. You can do multiple selections and act on multiple selections. You can add things, right? So just another one of those like more complex examples, I guess. So this is like a read and write example of how you can use AG Grid. And then I thought this would be interesting to have like some kind of like comparison table. So if you ever like looked up different phones that you're interested in getting, right? You can see the comparison. So it's kind of a similar approach, but using AG Grid, of course. And of course, you might notice that this table doesn't look like an AG Grid table if you've seen one before. And that's mainly because I customized the theming to be, you guessed it, tailwind and shadcn, right? So that's part of what I'm going to be going over in this tutorial, showing you how to do those like theme overrides so that you can get the AG Grid to look and feel like whatever your corporate design language is or whatever your personal design language is. So yeah, let's go ahead and jump into this. We're going to start by grabbing the starter code. So we'll go ahead and clone that repo. So we'll say git clone paste keys. There we go. And then open in VS Code. All right. So we'll go ahead and get all our packages installed. I'm going to do this in my terminal, but if you want to open your integrated terminal in VS Code, you can just hit Control J. I'm going to do this in my external terminal just because I want the free space so that I can, do this and still see what's happening on the side. So I'm going to run pnpm-i so that I can install all the packages. And then once you have them installed, you can run pnpm-dev. And once you run pnpm-dev, you should be running on localhost 5173. And then we can go ahead and open this. I'm going to go ahead and keep both of these on the side. And the starter code that I gave you provides you with just like the basic outline of the app. So you already have your light mode and dark mode and everything set up. You also have like most of the stuff that you'll need from like a data perspective. So if you head down into the examples, everything that we're going to be doing for this one is going to be under users. User display example. So this is where we're going to be writing all of our code for this tutorial. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is get our data from the store. So our store is already connected to the API. So all we got to do here is say const users equals use users store, and that'll import it from the store. And we're just going to say, so right now we're using a state selector. So we'll say state equals state.users, and this will give us our user state. So we can say users, nothing's going to show up because this is not assignable to React Node. So what we're going to have to do is something like this, json.stringify, like that. And then we can pass in the users and save, and it's going to be an empty array, right? Because we haven't fetched the users yet. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll say, I just did Alt-Shift down so that I could duplicate that line. So here we'll say fetch users. And this function will populate our store, our Zustand store, with the users object. In order to run this, we're going to use a use effect. We don't need a cleanup function for this one because we're just going to do a fire and forget. So it's just going to run once. So fetch users. And this is going to be called once fetch users is available. So there you go. So we hit fetch users and it's showing a bunch of users, right? Now this isn't really useful, but that's okay. Let's go ahead and get this into our table. So down in here, let's replace the JSON stringify users with an AG Grid. So we'll open up a carrier and we'll say AG Grid React, AG Grid React. Not sure why my IntelliSense is acting up. Paste that there. We can add our AG Grid and we'll just give it a row data. So the row data is where the actual data comes from. So we'll just say users for now. And then down here, we'll say column defs like so. So these are going to be the actual column definitions. So whatever columns we're going to be using in our table, we want to define them first. But let's see what happens if we don't define any columns. Big fat error, right? Because you need to say what columns are going to show up in your table. So let's just add a few for now. We'll add an empty array, and we'll just add the first column. We'll say field Now, of course, we do have the types for the users. So if we head into our state, you'll see that our user looks like this, right? So we can grab like, we'll just say the name, the ID, and the username for now, right? So I'm just going to copy these, head back to my user display example, and I'm just going to duplicate this down twice, a few colons, control click these, paste, and control backspace a couple times just to get that out of the way. Control shift left so that I can highlight those, put those inside of a quote, and then down, comma, and now we have an actual array. So we'll say, we'll give this div a style. We do have tailwind, so we'll just use class name, and we'll say h500 pixels, like so. And you know what? While we're here, we'll just say rounded, large, and we'll give it a border. Save that. And there you go. There's your table. Of course, this is using the default AG grid styling, which is fine. We're going to hook it up to the theme in a second. And right out of the box, it comes with the sorting, comes with the movable columns, all that jazz, right? So now we can start customizing and really making this like fleshed out. So the first thing I'm going to want to do is just to sort of clean things up. I don't want to have the column defs over here. I want to define them inside the component. So right underneath our store selectors, we'll say const column defs equals use memo. We're going to say ANFN, just an anonymous function. And I can get rid of these curly braces because we're just going to straight up return an array. And now we can we'll get rid of the whole array. Control X that. We'll say column defs. There we go. And then we'll replace this array with the one that we just copied. And now we can start filling in the rest of the columns that we want to show. And they're going to be the following fields, right? So we have our email, phone, website, company name, and company city, right? So if you see over here, you'll notice that it automatically figured out what the headers are. I don't know how it does this. I think they're probably just straight up like parsing the text themselves, but we don't want to have them define what our headers are, although it is a pretty handy feature, to be honest. So what we're going to do is define a header name for each one of these, and it'll automatically overwrite what it put in with the header names that you find. So if I hit save, then we can see that now instead of showing whatever was shown before, I think it was like address city, now it's showing city. Instead of showing company name, it's showing company. Now, I do want to change the way this column, the website column, is being rendered. I don't want these to just be text. I want them to be links. So to do that, we can basically come down to the website the website column over here, and we'll add a cell renderer. So we'll say cell renderer equals, and you can define this as a component outside of the column defs, but because this is the only one that we're going to do for this example, we're just going to define it inside here. So this is going to accept the params, and in this case, the params are just going to be the value of type string. We'll open parentheses, and this is just going to return a tag, which is going to link to the params.value. So that's the actual value that's in the text. We want to open it in a new tab, so we'll just say target blank, no opener, no refer, and we'll give it a class name of text blue 600, hover, underline, and dark text blue 400, like so. And of course, we do have to close our A tag. And if we save, well, it's empty because we didn't pass any data in. So we can fix that real quick by just saying params.value. We save, and there we go. So now you can see the links are showing up as clickable links. And I'm going to gamble real quick and click on one of these and see what happens. So yep, that doesn't exist because this is dummy data that's being served by a free JSON placeholder API. Now, there are a few settings that I think I want to pass on to all of the columns. And in order for us to do that, what we can do is come down here and define a default column definition. You can override these in the individual columns, but this will basically be like the quote unquote like default settings for each column. So we're going to say sortable. We want these to be sortable. So we'll say true. We want these to be filterable. So we'll say filter true. Oops, true. But, and we want these to be resizable. And we'll say true. Save that. So now you see the filter will always show up, and you'll see that these are always going to be resizable. And thankfully, we are already defining our error and loading state in our store. So we'll just say error. So if there's an error, we can handle it. And then if there's a loading state of true, we can also handle that. All right. And I am going to handle this, or I'm going to deal with this use memo error in a second. We are supposed to be saying that there are 0 dependencies, because basically we just want this to run on the mount of the component, and we're not going to change it afterwards. All right, so then right above the return, what we're going to do, this is of course the lazy way of doing it. There's better ways to handle errors, but in this case, we're just going to do it the easy way, and we'll say if there's an error, we're going to do an early return. We'll have ourselves an outer div, we'll show the error, and then we'll add a button component, which we have from that will let us, when we click it, fetch the users again. So we save, and then nothing happens because of course there was no errors in the fetch. Now what we also want to do is we want to show a loading state for the table when the data is loading. So we can say loading, and then we can use that state value that we pulled in. So we'll say loading, save. And oh, I'm pretty sure the issue here is that we have to add a ref for the AG grid. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. Right above the state, right above the Zustand store, we'll just add a grid ref like so. Make sure to import use ref. And then we'll use this down in the AG grid. So we'll say ref equals that, and that resolves our type issue that we have over here. Now, of course, we did mention that we want to have the shadcn theme show up over here. So I already have set up the AG grid theme using the shadcn, the color variables from shadcn. So basically what we're doing is we're grabbing, and of course this is not going to work for AG grid version 32 because that did styling in a different way. In this case, we're going to be using the theme quartz from AG grid community, and then we're just passing along the parameters for the various color token overrides. And of course, we have a light mode and a dark mode. And then the last part is this little hook, use AG grid theme, that I'm using to basically watch the dark mode variable in the HTML. And this is what handles the toggling. So this will return the actual mode to show, and we're going to use that in our component specifically over here. So we're going to say theme, but before I can do this, I need to come up to the top, and we'll do it right above the use ref. We'll say const theme equals use AG grid theme, like so. And now we can head back down to the theme and copy and paste that there, save, and now we're using our shadcn themes. So when we hit light mode, change this light mode, and vice versa for dark mode. Cool. So something that I do want to do is I don't want these columns to be movable. I want this to just be like a static table. So down here, I can do that pretty easily by just saying suppress movable columns. And for funsies, we'll add an animate rows, And of course, this is enabled by default, so you don't have to add it. But what this is going to do is, like when you sort, it's going to animate them. And then if you set this to false, so we'll say equals false, then you'll just have like your non-animated rows, right? But of course, we want to have animated rows just for fun, so we'll say true. And because we suppressed our movable columns, now when I click and drag, nothing happens, right? They just stay in their place. All right, so we're almost done. There are a few things that I want to do just for the sake of like making things look a little nicer. So I'm going to manually override some of the styles. We'll make the ID column. So here I want to say, I want to give this a width of 80. So this is going to make it so that it doesn't have a huge width. So if I come in here and do something crazy like 800, well, there you go. So, but for now, we just want it to have 80. I do want to have it so that the ID always stays fixed where it is and everything else just slides underneath. So we'll give it a pinned property and we'll say left. And now we can scroll and all of the other data will just slide underneath the ID and the ID will always be here, right? So it's a pretty nifty thing if you want to have like fixed columns or pinned columns, I should say. So we're going to rapid fire the next ones. The flex is just going to make sure that on super wide screens that it fills up the available space so that you're not having a table where everything is just like kind of fixed. Like you have a bunch of like empty space to the right. So this will make sure that all the space is filled in the event that the table has grown beyond the width of the column. For username, we'll give it the same thing, but with a width of 120. For the email, same deal, but mid width of 200. And for the phone, I'm just going to copy this. Or sorry, that was email. Let's go down to phone, like so. And we're going to do the same thing for the website. And for the company name, so we'll say like that. And for the city, we'll just give it a 120. Oh, 120, like so. There we go. Now, the last thing that we're going to do for this example is we're just going to add an export to CSV button. First, I want to wrap this in a React fragment because I'm going to be adding the button on top of this, like so. And I'm just going to paste some HTML in the tailwind style. So go ahead and pause and copy this. But the main thing that you will care about over here is this button that has the handle export CSV function, which we will define right underneath the use effect. So there we go. So we're going to use our grid ref, export data as CSV. Going to name the file users.csv. Save that. And there's your export.csv. So if I hit export CSV, you'll see that it downloaded the file, and I'm sure we trust this. And there you go. There's the CSV. This is open in VS Code, but you get the idea. So there we go. That's just a little brief intro to AG Grid. I think I'm going to keep this one a little shorter. So I'm going to make the following examples their own independent videos. So yeah, that's it for this one. Appreciate you watching, and I hope you learned something today.